Good morning. This is Karl, Pastor Karl retired from Calvary Lutheran Church. You're retired almost a year and 3/4 now, which is nice. Well, anyways, good morning. It's a beautiful morning here in Western New York. It's a perfect day for getting out there, taking the dog for a walk. If you haven't been outside, if you live in Western New York, it's just a beautiful fall day. Couldn't ask for better, actually. It's short sleeve weather. There's a nice breeze, especially during pandemic. You want fresh air. So anyways, it also happens to be 9-27-2020, September 27th of 2020. We're still in the pandemic time, the time of we've crossed over 200,000 dead, and we've also crossed another milestone, 7 million plus infected. It's probably higher than that, but who knows? At least we know of 7 million. Anyways, none of that's any good. That's all pretty bad stuff. We're still living, watching everything we do, everywhere we go, everyone we get near, or hopefully not get near. It's just been tedious. We're nearing the end of the 9th month of this year of this nonsense. And it's a mess. It's the best you can say of it. Hopefully there'll be a vaccine soon. Well, it's interesting that the text assigned for this, it also happens to be the 16th Sunday after the Feast of Holy Trinity in the traditional church here. And so that's a text assigned to that Sunday in the ancient Paracoptic, or the old series of lessons, is from the Gospel of Luke, the 7th chapter, verses 11 through 17. That's the Gospel of Luke, chapter 7, verses 11 through 17. And it happens to be a story about Jesus, who had scheduled himself a trip, kind of a circuit trip, where he is going from place to place. And he had scheduled to go past a town called Nain. And he had also arranged for something rather unusual to be happening. Unfortunately, it's very much like what we have now. A mother had lost her son to something. We're not told exactly what, but whatever this was that took his life, she'd already lost her husband, and this was her only son, her only apparently child, and now he was dead and gone, and she and her friends were taking the body, the corpse, to be buried at the graveyard, which is usually done in Jewish tradition very quickly. Not something you linger around with. Sometimes today you find scheduling funerals 3, 4, 5 days in advance, but down the line. But back then it was usually the very next day, if possible. Well, Jesus arranges things so that this is the encounter. He's coming into town, and she's exiting town. So that's the Gospel of Luke, chapter 7, verses 11 through 17. And let me get that up here. And it came to pass the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and much people. Now when he came nigh to the gate of the city, behold, there was a dead man carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow, and much people of the city was with her. And when the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her, and said unto her, Weep not. And he came and touched the bier, and they that bare him stood still. And he said, Young man, I say unto thee, arise. And he that was dead sat up, began to speak, and he delivered him to his mother. And there came a fear on all, and they glorified God, saying that a great prophet is risen up among us, and that God hath visited his people. And this rumor of him went forth throughout all Judea, and throughout all the region round about. Here ends that portion of the Gospel text from the Gospel of St. Luke, the 7th chapter, verses 11 through 17. Now, I want to focus on just the first verse, verse 11 of this text. And it came to pass the day after that he went into a city called Nain, and many of his disciples went with him, and much people. Now, it's interesting that Jesus knew that this would be what was happening, because he had been traveling on a circuit that he had himself designed, a path that he would follow of place to place, one town after another, villages mostly, as that part of the world at that period of time, 2,000 years ago, was mostly villages. A few larger towns, and an occasional city, cities being much rarer. And so here in this smaller town, Nain, the widow was, of course, there with her dead son. But, of course, who arranged this? Now, you could say, well, it was unfortunate for this poor widow. The people of town felt awful for her. They were weeping and crying and consoling her, and that was the case. But again, who arranged this? Life and death are in the hands of only one, and that one is the Lord, God, the boss. The boss alone has authority over life and death. He doesn't share that with anyone else. He reserves that entirely to himself. And that's interesting, because in these days where we have over 200,000 dead in just 2020 in just the United States, and 7 million sick to varying degrees, we're looking at, and people are asking, why? How can this be? Life was, fun. Well, it wasn't all kicks and giggles, but it was, mostly fun compared to what it is now. I mean, you could go to the store and shop and linger. Can you imagine lingering in aisles shopping? I don't even remember that anymore. I know we used to do that, but it seems like forever ago. Or sitting at a restaurant packed with people in a sports bar watching the Buffalo Bills or something play football. I mean, people found that great times and fun, and you don't have that now because it's dangerous. But again, why? How? Who? Well, there's an answer for that, and that answer is the Lord. God is master over life and death. He says, I heal, and he says, I bring down. I make sick. And so whether we have health or we don't, whatever our state is, it is in his hands. And this is a unique thought. Because some people seem to think that bad things come from somewhere bad, and good things come from God. Okay, first off, besides being wrong, that is for a small child, fine. You can't explain harsh realities of the world or of God to small children. Small children need just real simplistic things, and for the sake of simple thoughts, and for children who are not capable of difficult things, we do say things like that. Well, yeah, this is a good thing from God. Okay, a blessing. A lot of people say these are blessings. That's fine. But for adults who can think and understand better than a child, to see what Scripture has to say is to see that both of these columns of people, a great number of people were traveling with Jesus. The text says, kai hochlos polus, and that in Greek translates to, and a crowd great. They were following Jesus as he came to the city of Nain, and we see there that much people of the city were traveling out in another column of people. And these two columns met. And yet what we see is that God is responsible for both of these columns. It's not like, oh, good, Jesus is here, now we can be rescued from this, what ails us, what afflicts us. No, that's child thinking. What we have here is, oh, here's Jesus leading a column of life and the gospel and forgiveness and God's love, and here we meet a column of death, also brought about by Jesus, who brings us death in this world. He brings us life, he makes us alive, he gives us life, and he alone takes life. No one else takes life. That's his responsibility. And so these columns are both his doing. And so this is an interesting thing in how we look at a time when illness and death have become incredibly prevalent in such an unusual way. We haven't seen anything like this for over 100 years in our country. But here it is. And people would say, well, we need to call on God. We need to appeal to God to be here, to be with us. Oh, he's here. Who do you think is bringing death? Who do you think is bringing disease? Oh, he's here all right. He's been here. He doesn't leave. And he knows our plight because he's brought us our plight. You know, this whole thing of disease isn't new. Well, it's new for a lot of people who are healthy. But if you're one of the people like myself who's spent a life wrestling with chronic diseases of one kind or another, you will know full well who these diseases come from. And you just look at it and you go, oh, okay, thanks, boss. I struggle with nut allergies and other kinds of allergies as one of the troubles that I've lived with my entire life since birth. And I sometimes just look at the Lord and look up and go, you know, hey, really? Did I need this today? But hey, thanks. So much fun having my lips and my eyes swelled shut with allergy reaction, and it is seriously no fun having to be loaded on a gurney into an ambulance and you can't breathe, and then they take you down to the hospital and save your life again with injections of Benadryl and epinephrine and all the other things that they've used to keep me going in those times. And I'm thankful for doctors and nurses and all the rest, but I do know full well who these things come from. This is the same one who brings healing, is also the same hand that brings the problem. And when you look at illness, disease, and death from that point of view, it's becomes much more complicated. You lose that child simplicity of, oh, well, something bad happened here. Too bad God wasn't around to make it good. Sorry. That's fine for a little child who really can't understand, but for an adult who has some thinking ability, that's not the case. The text here shows us that, in fact, the first opening sentence, kai egeneto en to hekes, and it came to become, this word from ginomai, to come to be, to create, to approach something. That the Lord created this event at this time as a succession of events. And then when it says the next day, it doesn't really have a hemera, day, in there at all. It says heches. Heches is a successive order of things. Whether it was the next day or the next thing to happen. But it was an event created by the Lord to demonstrate something and to teach us something, especially important now, that God hasn't left us or anywhere else. And in fact, this virus, this plague, this whatever else, sickness is only from the same hand that brings health. Life is from the same hand that brings death. The same mouth that, for instance, accuses us of sin and guilt and complicity in all that is wrong in this world, that's God who condemns us, the Greek that's katakrine, speaks a word against us, is the very same mouth of the same God who speaks a word of kindness toward us. And that is the gospel, who says, yes, you're a mess. You can't do anything about your mess. You're sitting in a filthy mess, and that's unfixable from your end, so I'll do something from my end. And so he offers us this gift of salvation, this gift of forgiveness, entirely from his hand. And yet, it's the same hand that would declare us dead and under condemnation and death, thanatos in the Greek, because of our wretched sin and our mess. And so the same God, the same mouth that speaks death to us, then turns around and speaks life to us. And which is the greater of these messages, death or life? I mean, that is the question, isn't it? That's what it boils down to during pandemic, or really any other time, especially for those of us in this world who've been sick our whole lives, who struggle with chronic illness. And the greater of these two messages is life. The gospel supersedes the law. God's forgiveness removes his condemnation. And so we're left without any condemnation whatsoever. There's an old saying, preach the law like there is no gospel, but preach the gospel as if there is no law. Because in the gospel, the law has been abrogated. Christ has fulfilled the law, and then in his own death has taken away the punishment phase of the law, which was death. Mut in Hebrew, thanatos in Greek. In English, it just is death. What we're experiencing in America at an unprecedented, horrible rate, 200,000 plus in just 2020. But it's from the same hand that brings us life. The little babies that have been born during 2020, the same hand who's brought us death and disease. And so God is here. We don't have to ring bells and blow horns or do anything to get his attention. He's here. He's the one doing all of this the entire time. Don't have to get his attention. He made you. He knows you. And he also sent his son Jesus to die on the cross, which is already done 2,000 years ago for you, on your behalf, apart from you, without you, and yet for you. So that in your life, this God who brings us both life and brings us death, brings us ultimately life. Because even when there is death, and that's what we see here in this widow's son, he said to this young man, arise. And that's there in verse 14. In the Greek, it says, sui lego egerethetai. And that is you. I say to you, egerethetai. That's from egero, to raise up, to pick up something, to awaken, to get up. And so the young man rose up and began to speak, because God commanded life even where there was death. So you see, it's life, death, and resurrection come all from the same one hand. It's not like we have to get God's attention or that he's left. He's here, and it's from him all these things come. And so look to him ultimately for life. And when we're in disease and in death or struggling with whatever, if you're one of those fortunate people has chronic good health, if you can call it that, or if you're someone who has chronic disease and ill health, both are from the same hand of God. One is not more blessed than the other. I always despised that in my early life as a sick child with allergies and asthma, when people say, well, I've never been sick, I've always been blessed. And I felt like yelling, hey, genius, I've been sick, and I call that a blessing. I spent time wheezing and hacking and coughing because they didn't have all the cool medicines they have now for that back then. I'm 61 years old, and boy, that was a long time ago. And but I used to feel like just yelling at them, hey, dummy, you think just health is blessing? I got news for you. I'm alive. That's my blessing. I'm wheezing and hacking and coughing and sick and tired, but that's still my blessing. Because, hey, it's mine. So you can go on bragging about health, but I just didn't have it. I had some other thing from the same hand that brought them health, brought me something else. But you know what? I know whose hand it was from, and it's the same hand that will finally, in the end, bring us all to perfect health, a new body, life everlasting, and good times. And that's for everyone, because not one of you or I have done anything toward that. In that, just like the young man who was dead, who was being carried away to be buried, he contributed nothing except God, who looked toward him with compassion and said, get up. And you're going to hear that same thing at the sound of the trumpet, the last day. How wonderful. A thing from the hand of God for you. Well, okay, this is long enough here. We got to end. We're at 22 minutes. So again, this has been retired Pastor Karl from Calvary Lutheran Church, a little Lutheran church in Amherst, New York, somewhere in western New York, outside of Buffalo. And our church is closed right now, of course, because of the pandemic. That's why we're on the internet here. So I hope you have a nice day wherever you're living, and hope you see that all things are from the hand of God, and however your blessings are, and whatever they are, they're yours. And it's something between you and your God. And rejoice in that, because the one thing that is all of ours is the good news of the gospel: forgiveness, life, and resurrection. Again, take care. Be well. Wear a mask. Bye-bye.